items I may consume.
The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to commend my friend from Florida, Mr. Bilirakis, for introducing this piece of legislation, as well as my friend and fellow and colleague from New York, Joe Crowley, for his leadership on this issue. This is an important matter. The Obama administration has brought a new and positive tone to the American foreign policy in the Middle East. Yet, despite the President's desire to seek new beginning between the United States and Muslims around the world, there still lies fanatical, anti-American, and anti-Semitic efforts that continue to incite people around the world through broadcasts in the Middle East that are broadcast in television stations for those Muslim viewers. Without a doubt, freedom of the press and freedom of expression are the foundations of a free and prosperous societies throughout the world. Yet, with this important freedom comes the great responsibility to reject and repudiate that incitement to violence. This resolution attempts to remind us of that fact. For years, certain media outlets in the Middle East, particularly those associated with terrorist groups, have repeatedly published or broadcast incitement to violence against the United States and our allies. Television stations such as Hezbollah's Al-Manur, Hamas's Al-Aqsa, the Iraq-based Al-Zawar, and others that broadcast incitement to violence against the United States aid, in fact, to foreign terrorist organizations in their key functions to recruit and to fundraise and to incite further propaganda. This must not continue. Some of these stations are broadcast throughout the region by two prominent Arab world satellites, Egypt's Nilesat and the Arab League's Arabsat, in which both Saudi Arabia and Kuwait are leading shareholders, Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, who have relationships with our country. This is unfortunate. This propaganda threatens to long-term U.S. interests in the region and does a great deal of damage to the prospects of improving the bilateral relations between America and our allies in the Arab world. In addition, it undermines the prospects for Arab-Israeli peace. Make no doubt about that. Americans have witnessed this direct connection between the charged rhetoric of the jihadist narrative, as Tom Friedman called in his recent column that many of us have read, and incites actual violence. This incitement creates an environment conducive to and accepting of terrorism that impacts all of us throughout the world. As the U.S. and other nations join in fighting this terrorism, there must be a renewed vigilance against the purveyors of anti-American hatred abroad and the consequences for inaction, inattention, or state sponsorship of this hatred. We know in terms of what the outcomes prospects are. This legislation requires the State Department to submit to the Congress an annual report that details country by country Middle Eastern media outlets that engage in anti-American incitement to violence and the satellite companies that transmit them. They are the enablers. It also establishes a U.S. policy that satellite providers that knowingly and willingly contract with terrorist entities can legally be designated as a specially designated global terrorist for perpetrating this incitement. Under the Executive Order 13224, in addition, it calls upon our government to consider state sponsorship of anti-American incitement to violence when determining the level of assistance to and the frequency of our relations with other Middle Eastern states. We ought to take a reflection and make an analysis of this effort. This legislation attempts to do so. Finally, H.R. 2278 urges all governments and private investors who are involved with satellite transmissions to oppose the broadcasting of telecasts by any specially designated global terrorist-owned and operated station that openly incites their audiences to commit acts of terrorism or violence against the United States and its citizens and citizens throughout the world. I know that terrorists like Hamas and Hezbollah will not soon abandon their attempts to mass media means of promoting hatred and violence, but there are efforts that we can do and should pursue. It's long time past for all state-owned and privately owned satellite companies wherever they are located, to cease transmitting these ugly messages that encourage the murder of Americans and our allies. That is why, Madam Speaker, we and I strongly support this legislation, and I urge all my colleagues to join me in that support, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from California reserves. The gentlewoman from Florida is recognized.
Thank you so much, Madam Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may.